The smell of freshly turned earth and pine resin was the closest thing to scripture Elias Vance knew. It was a smell of honest labor, of the earth's promise, a rich, dark scent that clung to his linen shirt and lodged itself permanently beneath his fingernails. For Elias, life was measured in seasons, not in parliamentary decrees past 3,000 miles away. His farm, a modest 70 acres nestled against the rugged green folds of the Massachusetts Bay Colony's western interior, was his whole world. It was an ordinary world, a world defined by the relentless rhythm of the sun and the silent work of hands. He was 32, a husband to Sarah and a father to two boisterous boys, Thomas and Samuel. His house was solid, built of rough-hewn timber and mortar mixed with the very soil he worked. The front porch offered a view not of the sea or a bustling port, but of the sloping meadow where his small herd of cattle grazed and the thick whispering forest that marked the edge of civilization. He considered himself a free man, beholden to no one but God and the necessity of his own survival. His days were monotonously productive. Wake before dawn, a hard bread and molasses, then out to the fields. He'd spend hours behind the plow, the iron share biting deep into the fallow ground, land that had lain unplanted for a season to restore its nutrients. This was his preferred work, a quiet meditation on patience. He knew that if you rushed the earth, it would yield little. You had to respect the natural cycle, the necessary pause before the new growth. But lately, the necessary pause seemed to be ending. The prevailing social conditions in their small inland settlement, Harmony Creek, were not of revolution, but of uneasy peace. They were subjects of the British Crown, a fact Elias took for granted, like the change in tides. They spoke the King's English, used the King's coin, and occasionally a worn copy of the King James Bible was passed around the community. They were provincials, settlers who had carved a life out of a wild continent, and they maintained a fierce, almost defensive pride in their self-sufficiency. This self-sufficiency, however, was slowly being chipped away. The trouble wasn't a sudden cataclysmic event, it was a slow, creeping anxiety, like a blight that started in a neighbor's field. It began, predictably, with money. For decades, the colonists had governed their own affairs, taxed themselves through their local assemblies, and traded with a measure of independence. Now the mother country, burdened by the immense debt of the recent French and Indian War, was looking across the Atlantic with a new, hungry eye. Elias wasn't a man of politics, he was a man of the soil. When he first heard talk of the Stamp Act 4 years prior, he dismissed it as an issue for the merchants in Boston. What did a tax on legal papers and newspapers matter to a farmer who rarely saw a printed word beyond a sermon? But the consequences trickled down. The price of nails went up. The cost of a legal deed for a new plot of land became prohibitive. The small debts he carried from the local general store seemed to grow heavier. "They starve us slowly, Elias," his neighbor Josiah Grant had grumbled over a cold evening over a shared pipe. "They call it taxation. I call it tribute." Elias hadn't wanted to agree. He felt a deep-seated loyalty to the crown, a respect for the established order that had allowed his family to flourish here. He'd been taught that the British Constitution was the most perfect instrument of liberty in the world. He clung to the idea that this was a misunderstanding, a distant administrative error that would be corrected. His wife, Sarah, possessed a more practical, less sentimental view. She saw the strain in the markets when she went to sell their modest surplus of wool and honey. She heard the frustration in the voices of the few itinerant traders who made the long journey inland. It is not the money, Elias, it is the principle, the right to our own purse. If they take it today for stamps, they will take it tomorrow for the very sun that warms our corn. Sarah's words, quiet and sharp, often cut deeper than any political rhetoric. The ordinary life of Harmony Creek was starting to feel poisoned by these distant decrees. The king's soldiers, redcoats, were a rarity in their quiet valley, but their presence in the coastal cities was a constant, unnerving fact. The soldiers were not protecting them, they were seen as enforcers of policy, a visible symbol of a power that had grown cold and dismissive of their welfare. Elias's own personal turning point was small, domestic, and utterly humiliating. He needed a small, inexpensive roll of parchment to finalize the sale of a few bushels of seed corn to a newcomer. The clerk at the magistrate's office demanded a sum for the required stamp that was nearly a third of the value of the transaction itself. When he argued, invoking the local custom, the clerk, a local man who had suddenly gained a measure of small-minded authority, shrugged and pointed to the royal seal on the desk. "His Majesty's law, Elias. You want to sell your corn, you pay your due." It wasn't the money. It was the feeling of a stranger's hand reaching into his pocket, legitimizing its greed with a far-off, unfeeling authority. He paid it, but the coin felt hot and corrosive in his palm as he handed it over. The encounter left him with a bitter taste, a sense that the contract between subject and ruler, the unspoken agreement of protection and respect, had been violently broken. This feeling of violation of custom and trust was the prevailing social condition. It was the quiet outrage of people who believed they were reasonable, free Englishmen, suddenly being treated as a conquered, subjugated population. The ground, once fertile and safe, was now fallow in a different sense, waiting for the seed of resistance to be planted. He was just a farmer. His hands were used to handling a plow, not a musket. But as he sat on his porch that evening, watching the last light fade over the distant, silent mountains, he felt an undeniable truth settle upon him. The peace they enjoyed was fragile, and the time for patient waiting was coming to an end. The soil was ready. All that was missing was the rain of conflict.